So the today I want to talk about acceptance. Um, and I came across actually this quote this morning from my little Zen calendar from yesterday that I actually hadn't looked at until today. And this is a quote that I think is very, very germane. A quote from Thomas Merton, who was a Catholic priest and monastic, who became very interested in Zen before in the last part of his life. And some of his insights about Zen, I think, are really, really good and interesting. So he says, Buddhist meditation, but above all that of Zen, seeks not to explain, but to pay attention, to become aware, to be mindful. In other words, to develop a certain kind of consciousness that is above and beyond deception, by deception by verbal formulas or by emotional excitement. So I think that's a great introduction to some of the things that I want to talk about acceptance. For myself, I first learned about the Buddhist approach to acceptance from a small book by Gil Fronsdal called the Issue at Hand. And Gil Fronsdal is a teacher in both the Insight meditation tradition and the Zen tradition. And to me, one of the most interesting things about American Buddhism is that I think especially Insight meditation has given us is the melding of modern psychology with meditation practice. And in fact, quite deliberately reflecting ancient Buddhist psychology, which is actually very sophisticated, and it shows up in many of the ancient texts in which the practice of mindfulness is based. And so here's a quote from Fronsdal, and this is in his chapter called Mindfulness of Emotions. The Buddha once asked a student, if a person is struck by an arrow, is it painful? And the student replied, it is. The Buddha then asked, if a person is struck by a second arrow, is that even more painful? The student again replied, it is. The Buddha then explained, in life, we cannot always control the first arrow. However, the second arrow is our reaction to the first. This second arrow is optional. And Fronsdal goes on to say that freedom in Buddhism is not freedom from emotions, it is freedom from complicating them. Because it's these emotional tangles that hamper our ability to live life fully and freely. Last week, I talked about listening to ourselves and to other people, sometimes simultaneously. So I want to say that this is not freedom from emotions. Again, I'll emphasize that. It's not freedom from having emotions. It's a different kind of freedom. And this is the way Fronsdal breaks it down. This is a process that he follows in mindfulness. In a sense, mindfulness of the second arrow. Because first there is a sensation, there's an experience, and then there is our reaction to it. And it's our reaction that we want to study. And this is a posture not of getting rid of emotions, but in a very wide, spacious sense of accepting them. So he talks about 4 steps. The first one is recognition, and I'll go through these each separately. The second is naming. The third is acceptance, and the fourth is investigation. So the first step, recognition, is what I've often called noticing. And I've talked about it in the frame of taking Dogen's backward step into awareness, shining an internal light on our cognitive and emotional processes, so that we begin to understand ourselves and our motivations. So the first thing we do is that we recognize in ourselves that we have emotions. what they feel like in our body and what our minds tend to do with them, what our heart mind tends to do with our emotions. This is what Fronsdal calls recognition. Recognition, I call noticing. Either one is fine. Fronsdal recommends a second step of naming. For example, you could say, oh, noticing that I am angry, or oh, I'm scared, or oh, I'm in pain. A moment of noticing, or something like that. And sometimes it's helpful to actually acknowledge, oh, this is happening to me, and naming it. That, I think, is a very helpful initial step of taking the backward step. Oh, this is what's happening inside me. Taking the backward step into awareness, and you're observing what is happening to you inside. And the act of naming gives me just a little perspective on my emotional pattern. And you do this over and over and over and over again, day after day after day after day, and you begin to see what your internal life is like. So the third step of mindfulness of emotions is acceptance. So I want to talk a little bit in more detail about that. So with acceptance, he says, we simply allow emotions to be present, whatever they may be, not judging them, neither condoning them nor justifying them, not acting them out by allowing them to be our motivations, simply observing them, allowing them to move through us without any inhibition, resistance, or encouragement, just seeing them. And we accept honestly that we have this emotion. And sometimes we have an emotion that we don't want, that we don't like, that we think we shouldn't have, or any number of things like that. And that's another arrow, if you will. And we just step back further and notice that we do that too. Acceptance does not imply approval. It doesn't mean, oh, I'm a good person because I feel these feelings. It doesn't mean that. It means simply acknowledging the reality of their presence without judgment. So try it right now. Just try it. Just close your eyes for a second and feel what's in your body right now. And name it. And breathe. And if there's a third arrow, name that. And breathe. And if there's a fourth arrow, even. So maybe you've had a moment of experience some freedom in the great space of awareness, in the inherent acceptance of awareness, because awareness is inherently accepting. I had a kind of a breakthrough on this subject about 10 years ago when I was at a retreat in Mill Valley, and there was a break in the retreat, and I went for a walk up on the side of Mount Tamalpais, and I was really, really, really angry, and I decided that I would just let myself be angry while I was on this solitary walk. And I was angry at my teacher, with whom I had a fractious relationship, and so because I was alone, I just allowed myself to rant and curse and yell and scream until I was done, and watch myself doing it. And I walked back to our meeting place, and I was quite calmed down by then. And the group was gathering outside for to do some what was in the schedule as kinetic exercise. And then it was announced that we were going to be doing yoga. And I had a sudden flash of anger because I hate yoga, because I'm very inflexible and I can't do it very well. And, but I was just, so I was inside myself. And I went up for the introductory sun salute. And I suddenly had this overwhelming experience of what I could only call the great heart of awareness, the essence of compassion toward my anger. And it was really startling, and I almost fell down. And I suddenly realized the enormous power of awareness and the inherent compassion in it. Because the compassion was there for a whole set of emotions that I thought were something bad about me. And anyway, it's this experience, which was so profound for me, that I base my understanding of compassion and acceptance on. The compassion that is inherent in the radical presence of awareness. The compassion that does not judge but accepts. Someone who has contributed a great deal in this field is a psychologist and teacher of insight meditation called Tara Brach. And many of you are probably familiar with her work. And she has much to say about acceptance. And she writes that inner freedom begins with accepting everything about ourselves and our lives. An inner process of accepting our actual present moment experience. So I hope you might have had just a smidgen of that when you took the backward step a few minutes ago. It does not mean that we put up with harmful behavior, both by ourselves or by other people, but that we see it and recognize it for what it is. And for her, acceptance implies two things: clear seeing and compassion. What Pema Chodron would call clarity and gentleness, otherwise known as wisdom and compassion. The two inherent qualities of awareness that we step into in Zazen. And she calls them wings. The wing of clear seeing recognizes what's happening in our moment by moment experience without trying to manage it in any way and without pulling away. And this is what we cultivate in Zazen. Little things like if there's a fly in your room when you're trying to meditate, and you, instead of getting your fly swatter out or blowing it away, you just are there with the fly and you watch the fly, and the fly lands on your forehead and walks around, and you watch that, like doing something like that in Zazen. You do that with yourself and what happens inside. So try it again. But just close your eyes and see what's there. Bodily sensations, feelings, thoughts. Just inventory them, that's all. So that's the wing of clear seeing. The wing of compassion is our capacity to relate in a tender and understanding way to what we perceive, instead of resisting. In effect, we embrace our internal difficulties with the kindness of a mother holding her child, regarding our grasping with gentleness and care. So now try that. Take some breaths and let your awareness be an occasion of gentleness and care. Clarity and gentleness equals acceptance. Brock suggests that we bring this clear and kind attention to the patterns of thoughts and feelings, behaviors, and events that shape our life experience, becoming more and more aware of our motives for our own behavior. So this is a way of turning towards our suffering. This is a way of practicing with the first noble truth of suffering. Turning towards and being present. And doing this actually gives us some perspective on our clinging, our longing, our yearning, that things be otherwise. And the ability to understand and accept ourselves in our full humanity gives us the ability to accept and understand the full humanity of another. Caring about and for ourselves makes it possible to care about and for another. Think about this in your close relationships. And in the week that's coming up, pay attention to working with your emotional reactivity in relationship and paying close, clear, and gentle attention to it, and see if that doesn't make it easier to listen and pay attention to and accept your partner or your friend or your family member. Caring about ourselves is actually, and caring about the other person are one and the same. And actually, this process, this practice, is the basis of Buddhist ethics. Now, admittedly, sometimes it's not so easy. It's hard to see and accept some parts of ourselves, much less parts of our friends and relations. We've all had habits of judging, denying, resisting, and pushing away unwanted traits. But in fact, this approach just tightens the screws of tension and fear. The clear seeing and gentleness of awareness, of acceptance, offers a spacious freedom from our inner pain. So it's freedom from the pain. It doesn't mean that the pain goes away, but there is the pain and the freedom at the same time. And the great space of awareness is infinite. It's always big enough to be fully present and to hold and abide with the whole of our experience. Thank you